One of the strange things about Henry is that we don't really know what he dies of. It's very hard to medically diagnose people from 4 centuries.
King Henry VIII spent his life building a legacy of power, but his death started a chain of events that stayed secret for 500 years. Most people do not realize that his massive lead coffin actually broke open long before anyone found it. When the vault was finally opened, historians found something that made them want to walk away and never look back. It was a mix of broken bones, strange liquids, and a second king thrown in the dark. Things get even crazier when you realize the king's dream tomb was sold off piece by piece. Royal decay in the dark. Henry VIII spent the last years of his life in a way that truly shocked everyone who lived in the palace. The royal household saw a ruler who could barely move 3 feet without someone helping him. The king had grown so big that he weighed over 400 pounds and needed machines to lift him. His once strong body was failing and his legs were covered in deep sores that just would not go away. These sores were so bad that the smell filled up entire rooms before he even walked in. Doctors later thought he might have had a blood problem, but at the time people just saw a king who was falling apart. He was in constant pain and everyone knew the end was coming soon. When he finally died in January 1547, the people in charge of the body had a huge problem on their hands. The people who prepared the bodies used spices, oils, and alcohol to keep them from rotting. But Henry was different. His body was already breaking down before he even stopped breathing. Because he was so large, they had to build a giant coffin lined with thick sheets of lead to keep the smells and fluids inside. This giant lead box acted like a pressure cooker for the gases building up inside. As the body rotted, the pressure inside the sealed metal box got higher and higher. This made the coffin very dangerous because it could crack or even pop at any moment. During the long walk to Windsor Castle, the workers had to stop at a place called Cyan Abbey to rest for the night. While the coffin sat in the hall of the abbey, something gross happened that people still talk about today. Writers from that time said a dark liquid started leaking out of the lead box and onto the floor. Some even said that dogs got into the room and tried to lick the liquid before being chased away. People thought this was a sign from God that he was unhappy with the king's life. Whether that part is true or not, it proves that the king's body was already in bad shape. Henry was put into a small hole under the floor of the chapel as a temporary fix. He was supposed to be moved to a massive, beautiful tomb later, but that never happened. Jane Seymour, his favorite wife, was already in that same hole waiting for him. The workers felt like the burial was rushed and that something was wrong with the box. A dark fluid was only the beginning of the nightmare. Henry VIII did not just want a regular grave because he wanted a monument that would be bigger than anything else in England. He wanted future kings to look at it and feel small compared to him. He actually stole a tomb that was being built for a man named Cardinal Wolsey. The king took the black marble and the expensive decorations for himself. He told artists to make the design much bigger and to add lots of gold angels and statues. There were supposed to be full-size images of Henry and Jane Seymour lying on top made of bronze. Skilled workers from Italy came to England to carve the pillars and melt the metal for the statues. It was going to be the most expensive thing anyone had ever seen in the church. The problem was that Henry spent all of his money on wars against France and Scotland. The royal bank account ran out of cash and the work on the tomb stopped. The Italian artists went back home and the pieces of the tomb were just put into storage boxes. When Henry died, his will said the tomb was almost done. But that was a lie. He just wanted people to think it was finished so his children would feel forced to put it together. His son Edward and his daughters Mary and Elizabeth did not care about the tomb at all. They had their own problems to deal with and they did not want to spend millions of dollars on their father's pride. Over many years, the beautiful pieces of the tomb were sold off to make money for the crown. Some of the black marble was actually used much later for the tomb of Lord Nelson. Other parts of the gold statues were melted down or sent to other churches across the ocean. The greatest royal tomb in history was basically sold for parts. While this was happening, Henry stayed in that small dark hole under the chapel floor. Nobody ever came to move him to a better place. The world forgot that the most famous king in England was sitting in a temporary box that was slowly falling apart. His dream of a golden monument turned into a pile of junk. The giant tomb was gone, leaving the king in the dark. A missing royal vault. When Henry was first put into the ground, everyone knew exactly where he was. The church leaders stood right over the hole and watched the stone get moved into place. But because everyone thought he would be moved later, nobody bothered to put a name on the floor. There was no sign or writing to tell people that a king was under their feet. As the years went by, the chapel changed a lot. New floors were put down and the wooden seats for the singers were moved around. The documents that showed the floor plan were lost or destroyed during times of war. Eventually, the people working in the chapel could only guess where the king was. Visitors would come and ask where Henry VIII was buried, and the workers would just point to the middle of the room. They knew he was somewhere under the choir, but they could not pick the right stone. Life in the chapel just kept going like normal. People would walk over the floor every day to pray or sing, never knowing they were stepping on Henry VIII. Some people were scared to look for the vault because they thought it would bring bad luck. They believed that disturbing a king's grave was a very bad idea. Because of this fear, the hole stayed sealed and the silence grew for hundreds of years. The vault became invisible even though it was right there in the open. The memory of the burial just faded away until it was like a ghost story. People started to think that Henry must have been buried somewhere else in a secret location. It seemed impossible that such a big king was in a tiny, unmarked room. The silence lasted for generations until a huge political problem forced people to open the floor again. This happened when another king lost his life and needed a place to hide forever. The new king's arrival would change the vault into a crowded mess. The secret of the floor was about to be broken. The second king to enter the dark was Charles I. He had his head cut off after a big war, and the people in charge did not want anyone to find his grave. They wanted to bury him in a place where no one would go to visit him. Windsor Castle was perfect because it was guarded by soldiers and very private. They looked for a spot that was out of the way and remembered the old stories about a vault under the floor. When they pulled up the stones, they found Henry VIII and Jane Seymour waiting in the dark. They did not have time to be careful because it was a cold winter night and they were in a hurry. Charles was in a very heavy lead coffin that was hard to move. The vault was very small and cramped, so the workers had to push and shove to make it fit. In the rush, they accidentally smashed into Henry's coffin and broke the wooden stands. Henry's giant lead box was already weak from all the gas pressure inside. When they hit it, the metal started to rip and bend. They didn't care about the damage and just shoved Charles in right next to Henry. Now the vault had 2 kings and 1 queen squeezed into a space meant for 2 people. They sealed the floor back up and didn't tell anyone what they had done. Many years later, in 1813, some workers were fixing the floor and accidentally dropped a heavy stone. It fell right through the floor and opened a dark hole that smelled like old dust. When they looked down with their lamps, they saw the 3 lead coffins. They called the royal officials and the doctors to come look. Everyone was quiet as they peered into the hole. They saw that Henry's coffin was a total wreck compared to the others. It was tilted at a weird angle and the metal was split wide open. The royal experts were worried the whole room might collapse if they touched anything. What they found inside the lead was a total horror show. Evidence in the bones. The air inside the vault didn't just smell like dust, it smelled like 5 centuries of stagnant, rot-filled history. As the man lowered himself into the darkness, his single oil lamp flickered violently, struggling against the heavy oxygen-deprived atmosphere. Every breath felt like a gamble. Above him, the massive stones of St. George's Chapel groaned under their own weight, creating a terrifying, ticking clock sensation. If the vault collapsed now, he wouldn't just be a witness to history, he would become part of it. When the light finally steadied, the man gasped. The scene was a chaotic juxtaposition of royal dignity and gruesome neglect. To his left, the coffin of Jane Seymour, Henry's 3rd and supposedly favorite wife, was a marvel of preservation. The lead was straight, the edges were sharp, and she sat in a place of honor, seemingly untouched by the passage of time. But as the lamp swung to the center of the room, the mood shifted from reverence to pure horror. Henry VIII's coffin was a catastrophic wreck. This wasn't a tomb, it was a crime scene. The massive leaden casket, once built to hold the most powerful man in Europe, had quite literally exploded from the inside out. Historians believe the sheer buildup of gases from the king's decomposing, oversized body had created an internal pressure so great that the lead eventually buckled and tore. Through a jagged, rusted gash in the side of the coffin, the man saw something that made his blood run cold. A thick, massive bone was protruding into the open air. It was a femur, huge and imposing, just like the man it belonged to. But what caught the light were the bits of dark, matted cloth still fused to the bone. This was the ultimate forensic smoking gun. For centuries, people thought the stories of Henry's rotting, ulcerated legs were just exaggerated gossip from his enemies. But here was the proof. The bone was still wrapped in the remains of ancient bandages that had soaked through with infection 500 years ago. As the man moved the lamp lower, the indignity grew even worse. He realized he wasn't just looking at a coffin, he was looking at a debris field. Scattered across the damp dirt of the floor were tiny, pale objects that looked like pebbles. Upon closer inspection, he realized they were finger bones and joints from the king's hands. They had literally slipped through the cracks of his disintegrated casket and rolled into the mud like common trash. It was a mess that no monarch, especially one as vain as Henry, should ever have been left in. But the most chilling discovery lay in the far shadows. In the corner of the vault, the light hit a pile of bones that shouldn't have been there. There was no coffin for them, no nameplate, and no mention of them in any royal record. These mystery bones sat in a heap in the dirt right next to the greatest kings of England. Some experts immediately began to whisper wild theories. Were these the remains of the princes in the tower, the two boys murdered centuries earlier? Or was this a secret, shameful burial of someone the Tudor line wanted to erase from history? Finally, the light caught a dark, obsidian-like stain on the floor directly beneath the breach in Henry's coffin. It was a hard, thick crust of dried liquid. This was the black blood that had famously leaked out and been licked by dogs during his funeral procession in 1547. Henry VIII wanted a golden legacy, but he ended up in a shattered box with mystery bones. Should we open the vault again to solve the puzzle, or let him rot? Like and subscribe for more.